Good morning. Today we're leaving Picasso for a little while, and we'll look at an important movement that took place at the same time as Picasso's early works, this time in Germany. So we want to just look at the evolution of Picasso, because we keep in mind what Picasso has done during that time. And we remind you of what happens when he was a young man. And then he starts, this is just before he goes to Paris for the first time. He lives in Barcelona. In 1901, after his first trip in France, he's influenced by the Fauvist, and makes that very stunning self-portrait that he calls Yo, donc I am Picasso, that tells you about his ego and the fact that, as you know, very self-assured young man, he thought he had a lot of future and he was going to be the next Greco. Unfortunately, in 1901-2, he loses his friend Casagemas, and that really gives him a shock. He feels quite responsible that Casagemas committed suicide because he had let him go, he wasn't with him. And so you can see he turns to that blue period, and we have a dramatically different self-portrait there the same year. But you can see the impact that that death has had on him. Then by 1906, he's been to Gosol and has been influenced, has looked at the early Romanesque sculptures and frescoes, as well as at primitive Catalan art and primitive Spanish art too. And he's starting to really try to find just the essential in making a portrait. So you have just a few lines, in fact, and this is a very big difference. And then by 1907, he's getting very close to Cubism. This is contemporary with the Demoiselle d'Avignon, which he did in that year. We talked about the portrait of Gertrude Stein. He had lots of difficulty with the face, and it's after being in Gosol that he's going to come with the solution that you see here, which in fact is amazingly similar to what Gertrude Stein looked like. And when people were criticizing that portrait, his reaction was always, she might not look like that now, but she will one day. And that was his reaction to it. But shortly after the finishing the famous portrait of Gertrude Stein, he will come with that work that we saw last time, Les Demoiselles d'Avignon. He worked on that for months, filled in about 13 sketchbooks of sketches that were preparing for it. And finally, I mean, that was all done in top secret thing. Nobody saw what he was preparing. And when it was finished, he only showed it to a few that were so shocked that they broke their friendship with him. Matisse, who had just met him, was absolutely repulsed by the painting and told him that he had broken any of the principles of art, which Picasso was delighted with, of course. But he was extremely angry. Even his dealer, Ambroise Vollard, cut a relationship with him for a while. Matisse is the same thing. He will come back later. But this was a shocker. And that painting, we have to realize, that was painted in 1907, is not going to be exhibited before 1916, when finally a friend dealer of Picasso will include it in one of his exhibitions. But it remained hidden from the view. So we have to realize that, because we always say that's a big influence on this and this and that. No, nobody had seen it. So let's look at all the different movements that are going to happen. You can say almost in 2 decades, let's put it that way. So Impressionism, against most people's opinion, didn't last very long. It was over already in 86. Then they each took their own path and went on with their paintings. The Nabis that we saw were done by 1905. And then we have Fauvis, and I'm sorry, something went off there, started in 1903 and will be finished by 1910. Die Brücke that we're going to see today will last from 1905 to 1913, where again the movement is dissolved because then all the members just go their own way. And we'll see that Der Blaureiter that we see here is only going to last 3 years. And of course, there comes the First World War. So it makes sense that it stops because a lot of things stopped at that time. Cubism goes from 1907 to about 1921. Futurism in both Italy, especially in Italy, is 1909 to 14. Suprematism, which is in Russia, 13 to 34. Constructivism, 1913 to 1980. And for whatever reason, I didn't put Expressionism, I don't understand. And the Dada movement will be 1915-24. Then we have Surrealism and so on. Expressionism, and I don't know where my mind was, but anyway, is going to run from 1905 to now. It's still an accepted movement in painting right now. Expressionism is particular. The German Empire, we have to realize that until for many centuries, the German states were made of over 1,500 states. Then by the mid-19th century, Prussia had pushed, and Bavaria, all the big states kind of took over some of these small states, and they were down to a little over 30. And then by 1871, Prussia had put enough pressure that the Habsburg and Prussia split. So it was over with the Austrian Empire. And now we're talking about the German states. And in 1871, the German states just reunited and made that federation that we now know. It was at first a German empire under the King of Prussia, who was named Emperor Wilhelm I. As we know, Bismarck was the Chancellor of Germany, and Berlin became the capital city of the Federation. Then we have, of course, alliances. The Germany, Austria, Hungary, and Italy goes against Britain, France, and Russia in 1882. By 1884, Germany starts having colonies that it hadn't had. If you remember, when we looked at the big meeting in Berlin, actually, Germany at that time had no colonies, but then they revert their idea and started having colonies with East Africa, Southwest Africa, Togoland, Cameroon. And then New Guinea, Micronesia, and Samoa were also part of the colonies of Germany. That didn't last very long because in 1919, after the First World War, Germany lost all its colonies and they were given to other countries. Of course, we know also that on the 28th of June, 1914, happened the assassination of the Archduke Franz Ferdinand in Sarajevo that started really the First World War. But it's always interesting to see in blue, of course, is Prussia, and look at how huge Prussia at that time is and really putting pressure on the other states. So some facts here, I just mentioned them all. So you have all these dates, the founding of the German Empire. But what we have to keep in mind is during that whole time, Germany had moved along with the Industrial Revolution, a much faster pace than most countries in Europe. And so with that galloping industrial revolution, Germany was really the big rival with England in the improvement on industry. It also caused a shift in population, where population suddenly were attracted by cities. And so we see a very fast urbanization of the country, which was going against the grain of people like Goethe, that really was attracted by nature and so on. And so you have that big conflict for young people that are afraid of that urbanization and want to go back to nature because they consider nature as being pure, closer to the truth, whereas, as you know, once you have an overpopulated city, you start seeing lots of crimes and lots of discomfort and often poverty, because people don't realize how difficult life can be in the city. So we're going to look at mostly these painters here. Mark will be for next time, sorry, and Kandinsky too, but these are the main leaders of the early Expressionist movement. I show you people that were influential, painters that were influential on that movement. James Ensor is a Belgian painter that you might be familiar with, and then Munch with the Scream, and of course Van Gogh. These were quite influential. So by the end of the 19th century, more artists lived in Munich than they lived in Vienna and Berlin put together. So Munich was quite an art center at the time. And the art community was dominated at that time by very conservative attitudes of the Munich Artist Association and the supporters in the government. So you would find that lots of mission statements that were written by the Prince of Painters, Franz von Lenbach, and here you see a portrait by him of the Chancellor Otto von Bismarck. So these were the paintings that the government expected, that were supposed to stimulate the nationalism of the population. But at that time, what happens is that you have a whole series of young painters that come out of the academies, and they want something else. And they are moving very rapidly to things that are much more abstracted and with subject matters that are completely different than the nationalist portraits. And so we'll see a succession of secession from the academy in the three main cities. In Munich, the Munich secession movement will start in 1892. So you have 96 artists resigned from the official association to be part of that secession movement. In Vienna, it started in 1897. Just probably the only one you might recognize is Klimt sitting in the seat there. And here is the kind of exhibition that they are favoring, with works coming most of the time from France, with different important painters there that they had no access to. We have to realize now we're talking about a painter. Oh yes, we've seen it on the computer, on television, in the newspaper. Remember, at that time, no television, no media that you could compare. So if you didn't have an exhibition or have had the chance to go to Paris, to go into the galleries and so on, you didn't know these painters. So when these secession movement started existing, they were able to favor these type of exhibition and put money into it to bring these paintings to Germany, so that young painters were able to observe and be influenced. And then finally, the Berlin secession movement starts in 1898. So it's just a few years apart. You see these three main cities in the German world. I'm including Austria at that time. And so you see here a whole series of painters, and it's always amazing to look at because they're so formal. And you imagine them, you know, in their workshop, but they still would have their tie on and put a smock on top of it, but they're always very formal. One of the most influential person at that time is Max Liebermann, who was a naturalist, an impressionist artist that had the chance to go to France and see the impressionist works. Don't forget that we're not appreciated in France either. So you have that marginal world, you know, with these young artists that really favor these new things. So this is the kind of painting, again, history painting, that were favored by the Kingdom of Prussia. One of the most famous is Anton von Werner. What you have in front of you is the proclamation of the German Empire in the Hall of Mirrors in Versailles. It took place in 71, which is the end of the Franco-Prussian War, where the Prussian won. And so they had access to the Hall of Mirrors. And in fact, what painters want is this: nature, something pure, something beautiful. This is what they're going to move to, and then much further, as we will see. And this is a painting by Max Liebermann, Aller in Overveen. So there are two artists that I'm going to show you that are not fully considered expressionists, but are really on their way. And I wanted to show them to you because they're quite stunning for some of the things they did. The first is Adolf Hölzel, was born in the Czech Republic, but then the family moved to Vienna, and he was working his family worked in Vienna for a while, and then they moved to Munich, where he started studying art. Then he went off in the countryside. And as you can see, this is his early works are very nature-oriented. In Munich, he became acquainted with Fritz von Ude, who introduced him to Impressionism, and this is the result of it. But you can see too that it seems to be working a lot with the palette, more than with the brush, that gives these kind of square patches of color. He is also going to found the Dachau art colony. Unfortunately, Dachau has a reputation for other terrible things, but it was also prior to the Second World War. It was an art colony with many artists going to. And he is going to move pretty rapidly to this type of works. He is very interested in the golden section, as well as in Goethe theory of colors. Goethe had written a whole book, and I should have brought it, but it's still in print. So you can read the theory of colors by Goethe, where he's quite really trying to explain the contrast of colors and the influence that one color has on another one. And you can see how beautiful. I mean, this reminds me of a Russian painter that uses the same kind of palette of red. They're just wonderful. He himself, Herzl, is going to develop his own color theory. And this will be based on a system. And, you know, color and music have a lot of relationship. And we have people that we'll see later on, like Kandinsky, who was doing lots of parallels between painting and music also. So he was also involved in creating the Munich secession and the Vienna secession. So he went on, finally, he was tired actually of being criticized by his colleagues when he was working for the school. And he retired in 1919 and went on giving private lessons and work as a freelance painter, and died in 1934 in Stuttgart, totally forgotten. So you can see all the paintings are private collections or location unknown. Another quite interesting character is Paula Modersohn-Becker. She was an early Expressionist painter, noted for a lot of self-portrait, and you will see how cutting-edge avant-garde her work is going to be. She's really considered one of the early most important early representative of Expressionism. She produced in her short life, because you can see how she died in her early 30s, over 700 paintings. She was also a feminist, knew exactly her past, didn't get swallowed as women were in the fact she had to get married and have children and so on. She got married with a much older man, Modersohn, and but decided she didn't want to have a child too early because she wanted to be already known, to made herself known before she had a child. So this is an early work, because when she married Modersohn, he was 11 years older than her. He had an infant daughter, Elsbeth, and this is the little girl that he's portraying there. She went many times to Paris, the first times with him, and she discovered, as you can imagine, all the big spectrum of painters that existed there, and was quite influenced by them. She was influenced by Cézanne quite a bit, and started producing some still lifes. As you can see, she took some classes at the Julian Academy, but decided to really start to develop her own painting style. She returned home, and within a few years, she had made more still lifes than she had done in 10 years before that. Then she went back to Paris. She left her husband behind. He wasn't interested in the kind of painting that she liked. And so they were not divorced. She just went alone to Paris, which was unusual, and met Heiner Maria Rilke, the great German poet, that you see the portrait here on the left. And she had befriended the couple, was a very good friend with Heiner Maria Rilke's wife. And just to remind you, Heiner Maria Rilke became secretary to Rodin, the sculptor Rodin, for many years. She did a lot of nude, which was quite interesting for women. As you know, women were not authorized in their training to see any nudes, and but she did a lot of nudes. Unfortunately for her, and I think that was a surprise, she became pregnant earlier than she wanted to, had a baby, and unfortunately they didn't recognize that she was suffering from postpartum embolism. She had terrible difficulty walking shortly after having the baby. And they told her, instead of looking at her legs and so on, to go back to bed and stay there. And she died of postpartum embolism at the age of 31. But quite a promising career. The one on the right is very Gauguin-like too, when you look at the simplification of the forms. So we have at this stage talk about the degenerate art problem. In 1933, Hitler rose to power, and within a few months, he established the Kulturkammer, the Reich culture chamber, with Goebbels in charge. Hitler believed that the classical Greece and the Middle Ages were the true sources of Aryan art. There was no place for modernist experimentation in the Reich. This was confirmed by literature with the Entartung by Max Nordau that was criticizing modern art, explained that as the work of those so corrupted and enfeebled by modern life that they have lost the self-control needed to produce coherent works. Paul Schulze-Naumburg, Die Kunst der Deutschen, Ihr Wesen und ihre Werke, The Art of the Germans, Its Nature and Its Work, and Kunst und Rasse, Art and Race, 1928, just the title tells you where he's going. Only racially pure artists could produce healthy art which upheld timeless ideals of classical beauty. And when they talk about race, guess who is aimed at? Is the numerous Jewish painters that existed at the time. In 1937 is the Entartete Kunst exhibit premiered in Munich. Entartete Kunst is degenerate art. By 1939, the Nazis burned nearly 4,000 works of German degenerate art in Berlin. And by 1942, a bonfire in the Jeu de Paume in Paris destroyed works by Picasso, Dali, Ernst, Klee, Léger, and Miro. What is quite interesting is looking at the information yesterday. The information was in the Wikipedia English, the Jeu de Paume, and when I looked at the same one in the French version, not a word. So they're not proud of what happened and they just forget it. So this is a really important movement because a lot of expressionist painters in Germany are going to be persecuted and are going to lose a lot of their work. So that's why we don't have that many examples. The Reich was looking mostly as a hero at Matthias Grünwald. They considered that he was the epitome of what German art should look like, though it's quite expressionist. If you look at the color used and the way Grünwald has incredibly, I love that painting, but look at these fingers on that crucifixion. It's so expressive. But they thought that was purely German. That was German influence, it was German inspiration, completely different to Dürer, who is a much more famous painter nowadays. But Dürer had been influenced by Italian art, had gone twice to Italy, and was influenced by Flemish art too. And so he was considered as corrupted, if you want. And so they didn't look at Dürer as being the example, but Grünwald, yes. And here are some examples of the art exhibition. And so you can see up there, somebody that we will see, Emil Nolde in Christ and the Sinners, Gerhard Marx, Heiliger Georg. And you see on the right, Adolf Hitler and Adolf Ziegler that visit the exhibition in 1937. And then here is the degenerate art auction in spring 1938, where they decided they had a special organization that was looking at all these paintings. They would go to the German museum and remove from the collection everything they considered degenerate. What was of what they thought lower quality that they couldn't sell, they burned. And the big works that they considered they could make money off, they put in auctions, and often it was done in Switzerland, by the way. And when they could sell paintings to the other countries, it was always funneled through Switzerland. And so here you can see multiple paintings by Picasso, the head of a woman and the two harlequins. And then you see a Vincent van Gogh that's going on the block. at least it was saved because then people could buy it. But this was a terrible thing. And so you can read paintings from the degenerate art action will now be offered on the international art market. In so doing, we hope at least to make some money from this garbage. That's the word of Goebbels. So we have to keep in mind the thing, because it's, as I say, going to impact a lot the painters that we're going to see in a minute. So what is it about Expressionism? We have, as often happens, first we have some writers who are going to come with very important works that are going to be influential on these young artists. And so Friedrich Nietzsche, of course, with Thus Spoke Zarathustra, August Strindberg with the Dilogy to Damascus and a dream play, the Ghost Sonata, Wedekind, giving so, and even Walt Whitman, with The Leaf of Grasses, and then the Russian Dostoevsky. In art, we've already talked a little bit about it, but we'll see them in a minute. Grünwald, El Greco, Van Gogh, Gauguin, Munch, and Ensor. In music, Arnold Schoenberg, with atonal music, which is so ahead of its time. And then jazz-influenced work of Paul Hindemith and Kurt Weill. Cinema, you have the cabinet of Dr. Cagliari. And here is an idea. So look at how very modern the decor was. So much ahead of its time, too. And Nosferatu by Murnau. And what the expressionists try to say is that art comes forth from within the artist, the character of the artist's feelings over the analysis of the composition. The brushstrokes are exaggerated, swirling and swaying, that reflects the emotional state of the artist, and especially because of the anxieties of the modern world. Bold optical colors that lead to the confrontation with the urban world, social criticism. So this is exactly, there's a lot of anxiety with young people, and that's what they reflect in their paintings. So influence, we come back to Grünwald, so it's interesting, it influences the expressionists, but it's also the hero of the Entartete Kunst, the extraordinary altarpiece by Grünwald. Greco, and it's a very special elongated forms, the colors, the composition, going to be so influential on Picasso, we know that. Van Gogh, and this is only once they have had these exhibitions in Germany that bring the works by Van Gogh. Van Gogh was almost unknown by the turn of the century. And it's at the early part of the 20th century that he's suddenly appreciated, and the works come, and people are flabbergasted by the colors and the way he uses the brush. James Ensor, this is an example, is going to be quite influences on Nolde. Gauguin. The pure planes, the contour drawings, pure colors. And Cézanne, of course. And it's interesting because nowadays, even Cézanne doesn't have the place that he deserves, but he's been so influential on the painters of the early 20th century. He died in 1906 or 05, was completely forgotten. And they did a retrospective exhibition in 1906 that absolutely had people upside down. They couldn't believe what they saw and what that work. And the poor guy had been struggling so much to come with his works and never was recognized during his lifetime. And then Edvard Munch with paintings like The Scream. So the first group of people, and that was done in Dresden, that started that expressionist movement, more formalized, if you want, is Die Brücke, which means a bridge. And so it was really a bridge to modernism. It didn't last very long, but was founded in 1905 by 4 architect students but in architecture had to take some drawing lessons and so on. And they all ended up moving away from architecture when their studies were done and just devote themselves to painting. They wanted to modernize the spiritual abstraction of medieval art and the geometric aesthetic of African and oceanic art, plus using mechanical forms that they had studied as being architects. So you have that mixture of all this to try to come to something modern, but was still relating to the past. So they really want to use all the expressive possibilities of colors that to express the moods and the emotions. So the first one of the founders, is Ernst Ludwig Kirchner, was born in Bavaria. His parents were of Prussian descent, and his mother was actually a Huguenot, so a Protestant that had left France because of persecution. He finally went to university in Dresden, and while he was there, met with some other painters that we'll see in a minute. What they also did is look, contrary to the early tradition of woodblock print. And so all of them are going to do quite a bit of woodblock print. And this is one example of these typical media dating back to the 15th and 16th century. And especially people like Dürer, who had perfected to an incredible level. Here is a female nude. As you can see, very much avant-garde. But then next to that, he would have some lovely landscape, like the Bohemian Forest Lake. But he is particularly known for his jagged lines, and this is one of his most known paintings, The Street Berlin. Everyone who renders directly and honestly whatever drives him to create is one of us. And this is really that way that he has to look at people, that segregation of the 2 women and that the men that are confused into one another on the right, the colors that are what they call optical colors. They're not real, they're not the natural colors that you see, but what they feel like, and that gives the mood that he feels like. He is also going to show a lot of nudes. Often he had a very particular way of life. He was going from positive things to extremely down mood. He could have been bipolar, by the way. At that time, they didn't diagnose that the same way, but he has extreme moments of depression. But he was by then influenced by Fauvism, and so he's using these flat areas of kind of unbroken, unmixed colors, very simplified things. So this represents Erich Heckel and Otto Müller, who were playing chess while a nude woman is at the back.
Does that remind you of They Deadly Sound?
Of?
Picasso's They Deadly Sound?
Yeah, but this is what is really interesting. This is done in 1913. They had no idea that the demoiselle existed. What I'm trying to prove here is that there was many movements that were going the same direction. They want to simplify things. They want to make it more modern. And so they come with slightly different solutions, but many things are similar. Picasso is not alone in his way of doing. This is exactly what I'm showing. Of course, in 1914, the war comes and he volunteers for military service he was sent to Halle to train as a driver in a reserve unit. But very quickly, he shows that he's not mentally strong enough to stay there, and he is discharged after a mental breakdown. He's going to return to Berlin, continue to work, and produces this one, that self-portrait as a soldier, where he has the uniform, but then at the back is a nude portrait of his girlfriend of the time. And again, you can see these very hard lines in the way portraits and very blunt color. Shortly after this, he was again admitted to a sanatorium where he was diagnosed with strong dependency on Veronal and alcoholism. This is a picture of him with his girlfriend, where he's in the studio nude, in the nude. And apparently this was often, they would gather there in the studio and just be all in the nude, and it would end up in what you can imagine too sometimes. So it was a very free life for the times. I mean, I can imagine my grandmother in 1915, so this is a big difference. Here is a series of artists that he represents, and you can see again how he's using these colors and favors these mauve colors and purple, but all painters that are supposed to discuss, but there is a way of being estranged at the same time. Very difficult moment. Now, approaching to the Hitler time, he's going to suffer tremendously of what's going to happen. Once in the early 30s, as you know, they not only he has the problem of health at that time, but also the Academy of Arts in Berlin expels him because he's an avant-garde and a degenerate art person. He is very upset. He moves to Switzerland, to Davos, but was so depressed by what was happening in the country that supposedly on the 15th of June 1938 he committed suicide in front of his apartment. Now remember, that's the time of Hitler, and even where he is, there is a big influence there. They afterwards claimed that he had 2 bullet wounds in the body. You don't do that when you commit suicide. And they very quickly just forgot, they buried him, and that was over. So there is a lot of politics there, and a lot of people believe now that he was actually assassinated in front of his apartment. Then this is a view of Davos in summer. So as you see, the style has changed completely. Another of these important figures is Carl Schmidt-Rottluff. Was born in Rottluff, actually, district of Chemnitz. He did his studies and ended up in Dresden, where he met the other guys. And he's one of the founders of the movement. And look at this, you see again, this is 1915. We have again these very hard lines, the simplification of the composition. But with him, no beautiful colors. He uses a lot of earth tones and dark colors. For him, the draftsmanship was really quite important, big contrasting lights. As the others, he's also doing a lot of woodblock prints. And you can see these are 1918, 1919, very avant-garde, a lot of lines. That simplification, the one on the right could be a Picasso. It very much influenced too by primitive art. And why always that primitive art? Maybe they didn't put as much emphasis on the power of the primitive art, but more on the idea that it was going back to a more sensible world that was quieter, that was more perfect than what life had become in the cities. These are some of the, as they call it, some of the most powerful prints of the 20th century. Very angular. Then he moves to a little more colorful thing. This is by 1919. And of course, 608 of his paintings were seized from museum by the movement of the Entartete Kunst. By 1941, he was expelled from the Painter Guild and forbidden to paint. After the war, he was appointed professor at the university in Berlin, where he had a great influence on the arts, and died much more recognized in 1966. But all these painters had terrible time during the Hitler regime. Fritz Bleil is also one of the founders, but he traveled to Italy and the Alps, and so he continued to teach, but didn't stay in the group very long because he got married and gave more importance to his married life than he did to his art. He's the one who had drawn the first poster for the Die Brücke, but he does a lot of woodcuts. This is a colored woodcut, the pelican. The woman on the meadow. He married in 1907 and gave priority to his role as a father, and he left the group. And he is kind of almost pointillist type of paintings in 1907, so watercolor. Erich Heckel was born in Saxony, so in the north, was another of the founding members. Also pursued a degree in architecture that he quit to do his art. This is actually a portrait of Heckel by Kirchner that we saw prior. He is actually one, for some of the paintings he did, was the most accepted for the public with what he did. A lot of people from Die Brücke just didn't get that connection with the public. Public didn't appreciate what they were doing. But he has some strange work too. Influenced by primitivism. To make this one, it's quite interesting. He saw the wood block into pieces, inking each part separately and then reassembling them for printing. So they were looking at different ways of making something different. This is Stralsund. Again, revived the woodcut tradition. And he was one of the most prolific in woodcut. Then with his family, he went to that place in Osterholz in the north coast of the Baltic Sea and became enchanted with the landscape. And so he took his paper and watercolor and did these very beautiful bathers on the beach. So you can see how sometimes they really jump from a very fluid type of style to something much more hurtful, you know, these very jagged line and hard lines are really an expression of somebody who is suffering. And here's the portrait of a man. This is one of his most known plays. Again, colored woodcut.
This one, did he cut it in pieces too?
No, no. Now, the next artist that we'll see, Emil Nolde, is a kind of transition between Die Brücke and what we'll see not next time because we go to School of Paris, but then the one after in the Blau Heide. He did take part of both groups. Emil Nolde, quite talented. This is a head with pipe self-portrait. He was born near the village of Nolde in Jutland, so that's in Denmark, and studied in Karlsruhe, became a drawing instructor at the School of the Museum of Industrial and Applied Art in St. Gallen, Switzerland, was rejected by the Munich Academy in 1898, married a Danish actress, and moved to Berlin in 1902, and became member of the Expressionist group Die Brücke in 1906. So he's not one of the founders. And he is an incredible colorist. So here you have that flower garden without figure that was painted. It's just absolutely beautiful and completely different to other pieces that he will do. So there is silver blue, sky blue, and thunder blue. Every color holds within it a soul, which makes me happy or repels me, and which acts as a stimulus. To a person who has no art in him, colors are colors, tones are tones, and that's all. All the consequences for the human spirit, which range between heaven to hell, just go unnoticed. And this is so true. And you know somebody who's not at all interested in art, blue is blue. But for those of you that have touched to art or are very interested in art, you know that all these nuances that you can have in one color and what different impact it can have on a painting. And I think this is really good because look at how the geraniums are different to these, seems to be a chrysanthemum, large chrysanthemum. The Christ and the 12 apostles that are seated around a table is quite moving, and it was received with a lot of anger. People took offense at that painting, and it was removed from the museum in Halle, and then he took it and gave it a prominent place at the and was put into the Antarctica Kunst exhibition in 1937. He got the painting back and bequeathed it to the National Gallery of Denmark in his will. And this is quite influenced by Ensor, the Belgian painter. Again, we have optical colors, the face are really yellow. That's very typical of what Matisse does at the time, the Fauvist. The still life with mask. He has these visionary moods by times, and I don't know if he was smoking or if it was just coming from him, but it's very different. That's under Nelson Atkins, by the way. The incredible image here of the prophet. It's incredible. You have the feeling that the face is melting away. He did many religious paintings. He is the burial. You see Christ with people, and it's really emotional when you look at that. Though it's so simplified in the shapes and in the way it treats the colors, but there is an incredible emotion that comes out of this painting. Now, completely different is a later painting. By the way, he was a supporter of the Nazi Party from the early 20s. And he was quite anti-Semitic, had very negative opinions about Jewish artists, and considered Expressionism to be a very Germanic style. His views, by the way, were shared by Goebbels. But he then fell himself under the knife, and then suddenly his ideas changed. So he is, as Hitler rejected all these forms of modernism, he became condemned himself, and his works were removed from museums and galleries and were burned or sold out. This is much softer in a way. And then towards the end of his life, he did works like this that a little similar to what he did early on. A total of 1,052 of his works were removed from museums, more than those of any other artist. Some were included in the exhibition of 37, despite the fact he tried to have a personal appeal to the Baldur von Schirach, who was in charge of the whole organization. He was not allowed to paint, even in private, after 1941. And to go against this, he went on painting, but with watercolors, because there was no smell. And as the Gestapo would come unannounced in his apartment, if he was using oil, they would have smelled it. But with watercolors, they couldn't. And so he just was able to go on painting. So these ones that he did with watercolors, he calls them unpainted pictures. So this is just the beginning of Expressionism. We'll see in 2 lectures, we'll see the second part, which is the Der Blaue Reiter, with more known painters like Mach and Kandinsky and others that we will see. I wanted to put in between because, there's so many things happening at the same time. Said I'm trying to make a 4th dimension in my class. So next time we'll talk about the School of Paris with Modigliani, with Brancusi, who are the other, Klee is going to be there too. I mean, all these painters that are Utrio, what's his name again? Chaim Sutin, and so on. So all painters that are international painters that came to Paris and are going to know one another, support one another when they were struggling, that are contemporary and many friends of Picasso. So again, try to see a 4th dimension in it. So we all group these people together. So thank you very much. This was a shorter presentation, and you must love it.